Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Schaeffer. I'm a senior fellow here at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. This is the Transform Europe Debrief, a conversation series with leading experts on environmental policy in Europe and the United States. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Mark Jacobson, the director of the Atmosphere and Energy Program at Stanford University and co-founder of the nonprofit Solutions Project, dedicated to combined efforts from business, science, and culture to accelerate the transition to 100% renewable energy in the United States. His book, published last year, No Miracles Needed: How Today's Technology Can Save Our Climate and Clean Our Air, has been widely circulated as a rubric for how renewable energy is an achievable worldwide goal. Thank you for joining us and welcome, Dr. Jacobson.
Well, thanks, Carol, for having me on.
So my first question for you is how to think about climate emissions and climate policies. Is it helpful to think about climate change policy today as not just about protecting the climate for the sake of the Earth itself, but also as a cost-saving measure in the future?
Well, the same emissions that affect climate also affect air quality and people's health. And there are 7.5 million people who die from air pollution every year. So addressing climate change will first improve people's health and reduce the number of deaths and illnesses as well, which number in the hundreds of millions per year worldwide. This will save people money right away, even regardless of the benefits on cost savings. But in addition, there are energy cost savings from going away from fossil fuels to clean renewable energy. As we electrify our energy system and provide that electricity with clean renewable energy, namely wind, water, and solar power sources, our requirements for energy go down so much, like about 56% worldwide, primarily because of the efficiency of electricity over combustion. Electric vehicles are much more efficient than gasoline or diesel vehicles. Electric heat pumps for air heating, water heating, air conditioning, clothes drying, are much more efficient than gas combustion for such processes. And electrifying industry is much more efficient than combustion for industry, for industrial heat. And there are other additional energy efficiency improvements that will occur. So if we transition, we'll reduce the cost of energy by at least 56%, but we estimate up to 63%. People's annual cost for energy will go down because of the efficiency of a new energy system. So we'll not only clean the air, saving lives, saving people's health, reduce climate damage, that'll save huge amounts of money, but also will reduce energy costs.
When you talk about specifically people's health care in a socialized healthcare system, which is most of Europe, what are the costs, for example, that better clean air could offer in countries like Europe that, again, have a socialized healthcare system and need to take care of everyone's health?
Well, so worldwide, as I mentioned, there are about 7.5 million people who die from air pollution every year. In Europe, it's around 300,000. And there's a metric called statistical cost of life, which is the value economists put on people's lives. And it's kind of maybe not it's kind of cold, but it's worldwide in countries around the world. Every country has an estimate for what people value their own lives and also what country values their lives at. And that, if you just look at the deaths, and that value of life is anywhere usually from $5 to $10 million a person in US dollars. And, worldwide, if you look at 7.5 million people dying every year, it turns out that the worldwide cost per year of morbidity from air pollution is on the order of $30 trillion per year, which is a good proportion of the world's gross domestic product. But in reality, these are real costs that people are, like, when you are sick from air pollution, there are more hospitalizations, more emergency room visits, higher medical premiums for insurance, higher workers' compensation rates, lost work days, lost school days, and higher taxes, and also loss of companionship, and there's all sorts of other intangible costs. So there's a huge cost to society. So conversely, when we reduce air pollution, in the case of Europe, that's about 300,000 deaths per year, and hundreds, millions more illnesses. When you reduce those deaths and illnesses, you're saving huge amounts of money, and it's enormous in the sense that it's going to be a good portion of the GDP of Europe. So we have numbers that we've calculated for Europe, but I don't have those numbers handy to give you exactly.
I think I read a study that came out just 2 weeks ago, something like that, from the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact and Research, that said that climate change costs by 2049 will amount to something around 38 trillion per year, which is about double the total European GDP. Do you see climate change policy now as a way to save on those costs in the future, not only on an economic level, but also on a human level?
Yeah. So in our own group, independently, a couple of years ago, we estimated the world cost of climate damage to be another about $30 trillion per year, which is slightly less than the 38 trillion by the Potsdam Institute. And on top of the health costs, which are about 30 trillion. So that's $60 trillion of health plus climate costs by around close to 2050. So reducing climate damage, reducing air pollution, reducing emissions affects both climate damaging pollution and air pollution that affects people's health. The air pollution cost benefits will be seen almost immediately. So if you can eliminate all air pollution, all emissions worldwide from human sources, you can eliminate almost immediately $30 trillion of costs and based on statistical cost of life, in addition to the actual benefits of saving 7.5 million people's lives every year and hundreds of millions more from becoming ill. The climate benefits will accrue more slowly because even if we stop emissions of most what are called greenhouse gases, the existing greenhouse gases will cause climate damage for decades to come. So over decades, we'll see a benefit. But there are some climate pollutants that we will see an immediate benefit from. Black carbon is the main component of soot, which comes out of diesel exhaust, jet fuel exhausts, ship exhaust, and other sources. And that is a particle that, not a greenhouse gas, but it's a particle that affects not only climate, but affects air pollution. It's the second leading cause of global warming after carbon dioxide. And it causes about 15 to 20% of all global warming. So we will see an immediate benefit from reducing black carbon. And also the ozone, lower atmospheric ozone, is also a global warming agent that's also an air pollutant that its source is mainly air pollutants. And when we stop those emissions, that ozone in the lower atmosphere will be reduced immediately as well. So we will get climate benefits immediately from reducing both black carbon and ozone precursors. Ozone itself is not emitted, but chemicals that form it are emitted. And so there is some benefit immediately from eliminating climate affecting emissions, but those same sources of emissions also emit air pollutants, and we'll get an immediate benefit of the reduction of air pollution.
Can you explain a little bit about your process taking the human impact of, or the climate impact to human health and applying that to research in climate change and pollution overall? How you connected those two things together?
Well, in my whole career has been based on trying to understand and solve large-scale air pollution and climate problems. And so I started my career as a Stanford University about 30 years ago now. And even before that, in my PhD, I was studying air pollution and its links to climate as well. So air pollutants affect climate, and climate feeds back to air pollution. So I was studying those problems, climate and air pollution, and the impacts of both on human health and the environment in detail for a long time before I started looking at the solution, because I felt it was important to understand the problems significantly, understand all the interactions, understand the impacts of different chemicals on the environment from a pollution and climate point of view before coming up with the ideal solutions. And so it's during that period that the link between air pollution, health, and climate how climate change affects air pollution, because it turns out that even with, let's say you're in a polluted city, warmer temperatures due to global warming actually increase the pollution without changing the emissions more, just due to some chemical reactions that occur as a function of temperature. And also higher temperatures result in more water vapor, because your higher temperatures cause evaporation of more water. And that water vapor actually acts chemically with other air pollutants. So it turns out that in polluted air, the higher the temperature due to global warming, the more ozone air pollution you have. And so more people die due to the higher temperatures, due to the chemical formation of more ozone. And so global warming has an impact on people's health beyond like causing heat stress and heat stroke and agricultural loss and increasing vector-borne disease and increasing wildfire risk. Those are additional impacts on human health from global warming, but it actually increases air pollution. I was only able to find that through looking at complex interactions between global warming and air pollution through the numerical modeling that I did in the early part of my career, and I still do today.
And talking about some of your research, I'd like to just shift a little bit to your book. Where are we today with the technology that's available to achieve 100% renewable energy?
Well, we have 95% of the technologies we need to solve the problems of air pollution, global warming, and energy security simultaneously. We have the generator, solar, wind, geothermal, hydroelectric primarily. We have the storage technologies like battery storage, we have heat storage, we have cold storage, we have some hydrogen storage. We have the appliances and machines like battery electric vehicles, we have electric heat pumps, electric induction cooktops, LED lights, electric arc furnaces, induction furnaces. So the things we don't have are like long distance aircraft that have been shifted to either battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell electric, most likely hydrogen fuel cell for long distance and battery electric for short distance. And also long distance ships. So we don't have the long distance ships available that are converted to electricity, like either hydrogen fuel cell electricity or battery electricity. But we know how to do that. So we think that, if we put all our resources together to actually deploy the existing technologies, we can actually reduce 80% of emissions by 2030 worldwide if that's what we focus on, and then 100% by 2035 or soon after, because it'll be between 2030 and 2035 that we get these last 5% implemented. So we need collective willpower to do this, but it is technically and economically feasible. In fact, it's economically beneficial to do that. And the main problems right now is there are a lot of people who are too focused on what's called an all of the above policy. Let's just try everything and hope something works. And so we end up wasting a lot of money on technologies that are not useful at all, such as carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, electrofuels, small modular nuclear reactors, subsidizing existing nuclear reactors to keep them open, and bioenergy is another one, and even geoengineering. These are all useless technologies that have no hope whatsoever helping with the climate problem or air pollution problems we face.
Why do you think that there is that focus on useless technology?
Part of it is, the fossil fuel industry wants to stay alive. And so they have proposed 4 technologies: carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, and electrofuels, to keep themselves relevant. And so they lobby, countries, and they try, arguing that this is beneficial. Then they misrepresent what the benefits are and don't ignore what the actual disbenefits are of these technologies. Then there's the agriculture industry pushes bioenergy, like biofuels for ground transportation, biomass for electricity production, and other types of bio sources. And then there's the nuclear industry that pushes small modular reactors and keeping existing large reactors open with subsidies. So you have these big industrial complexes that are pushing for technologies, trying to claim that they are actually helpful, but these are really just greenwashing technologies that have no hope of helping with solving either air pollution or climate problems. In fact, most of them, worse than air pollution, kill more people, and most of them also have zero benefit whatsoever on greenhouse gas emissions if you look at the whole system.
You mentioned nuclear. I live in Germany. I'm actually calling you from Berlin. And the resistance to nuclear energy here is very strong. But in other countries, such as France, which has a much more historic reliance on nuclear, phasing out nuclear seems like it will be a much bigger challenge. How do you see that playing out in Europe? And what are the alternatives for European countries looking to supplement their energy with nuclear?
Well, it doesn't really matter what I think because nuclear just falls on its own weight. New nuclear does. Like new nuclear reactors in Europe in particular and the United States, for example, they're taking 17 to 22 years now from planning to operation. So regardless of cost, regardless of catastrophic risk problems or waste issues, you can't even get a new nuclear reactor operating in less than 17 years right now in Europe or the United States. And the rest of the world, it's 12 to 22 years as well. So, this is 2024, 17 years from now is 2041. We need to solve 80% of the climate problem by 2030 and 100% of the air pollution problem immediately. And when you have a technology that can't even be implemented for 17 years, it's completely useless. On top of that, the costs are enormous. It's 16 times the capital cost of new wind or solar and about 7 to 8 times the levelized energy cost for new wind or solar for new nuclear. Plus, it has all these risks. Meltdown risk, 1.5% of all nuclear reactors ever built have melted down. It has weapons proliferation risks. There are 5 countries that have secretly developed weapons under the guise of civilian nuclear energy programs or research reactor programs. It has waste risk. You have to store the waste for 200,000 years. It has underground uranium mining risk. About 10% of all underground uranium miners have died of lung cancer historically. And it's not zero carbon dioxide. I mean, it's about 9 to 37 times for new nuclear, it's 9 to 37 times the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions of new wind. So it's better than gas or coal, but in terms of its emissions, but it's not nearly as good as solar or wind. But the whole point is moot. You just can't put up a new nuclear reactor. And the same will apply to small modular reactors. They don't exist. They're vaporware. And there's no evidence they will exist at any time commercially, but they're not even planned to be ready for prototypes until 2030, 2031, which is way too late as well. And the cost will be enormous as well. And it has same issues with catastrophic risk issues as large nuclear.
You've done also a lot of work on urban decarbonization modeling. And I had a question about American cities and European cities, which are very different. They're generally just less car friendly. They have overall better public transit systems or more complete public transit systems. And Europeans overall have roughly half as many personal vehicles. But European markets are still struggling to transition entirely to an electric vehicle system. So what can the EU learn from your proposals to decarbonize US cities? And is what you found in your research in decarbonizing US cities applicable everywhere, do you think?
Well, I think in terms of electric vehicles, I mean, in Europe, especially like in Norway, I think last year around 90% of all new vehicles were battery electric vehicles, and battery electric vehicles growing. And there will be, I think it's in Europe and the US, there is this larger push for electric vehicles because of the cost savings, the fuel cost savings. In the United States, the cost of gasoline, like near where I live, for example, is $5 or $6 a gallon of gas, which is, if you drive an electric car, it's about equivalent of 70 cents a gallon equivalent. So you're paying, at least 5, but it could be 7 times as much for fuel. And that can save you on the order of $20,000 to $30,000 over 15 years when you're driving in the US. And in Europe, the fuel prices are even higher than in the United States. And so there's a benefit, there's a clear financial benefit for those who buy electric vehicles. Now, the upfront cost might be a little bit higher, but even if it's $5,000 or $10,000 higher, which it's not in a lot of cases, but even with that, you're still saving $10,000 to $20,000 over 15 years with a battery electric vehicle. So just from the fuel cost savings alone, there's going to be, worldwide, people will go to electric vehicles. There's no doubt about it. The thing that's lagging right now is like charging infrastructure for, especially in inner cities. It's difficult for, a lot of people don't have their own garage where they can put a charger in, so they're relying on public charging. But, I've seen, like in the streets of Paris, I've seen chargers like parking meters, the chargers are there too. So I think there are barriers that are being overcome in terms of electric vehicles. But in terms of decarbonization, some places in the US are doing really well, and some places are doing poorly. Same in Europe. There are a lot of places that are doing really, really well, and there are other places that are doing poorly. I'll just point to one example. In the United States, California, it's been amazing. Actually, I've been tracking for the last couple of months, the renewable energy output in California. And what I'm finding is like there are 44 out of the last 52 days in California, the main grid is 100% renewable for a portion of the day, or greater than 100% renewable, peaking at about 148% on a couple of days. And so for anywhere from a quarter hour to almost 10 hours during the day, we're producing more electricity from wind, water, and solar sources than we're consuming in the entire grid. And California is the 5th largest economy of the world, so this is an amazing feat that's never occurred before in previous years. Previous years, there's been 1 or 2 days in a year and on a weekend, never consecutively, that have been above 100% renewable. But now we're seeing it on a regular basis. In fact, this last weekend, it was like 83% over a 24-hour period of all the electricity consumed in California was produced from just wind, water, solar sources. So it's a combination of growth of solar, in particular in batteries, as well as just a commitment to reducing demand. A lot of that's rooftop solar that's been reducing the demand for grid scale solar that's been helpful as well.
And how much of that reduction in emissions energy is something that people can do by doing things like installing solar on their roofs or switching to electric vehicles?
Yeah, so people can do a lot in their own homes. If you have your own home that you have your own roof, for example, putting solar, getting electric heat pumps, electric induction cooktops, electric vehicles, this will save you huge amounts of money over a long time. I mean, I was fortunate to be able to build my own home in 2017. I put solar on the roof, batteries, heat pumps, induction cooktops, electric vehicles. I have not paid an electric bill, a gasoline bill, or a gas bill since then. So it's been over 7 years now. And the whole system, the solar and the battery system itself, paid itself off after 5 years. I mean, that was with some subsidies that were also available. Without subsidies, it's about 10-year payback. But solar is warranted for 25 years. So basically, there's some period of time that you'll get a full payback, and then you have free energy for next 15 or so years after that. And it's so efficient. I mean, we hardly use any energy. All these appliances are really efficient. LED lights are so efficient. They just hardly use any energy. This is why I'm actually producing 20% more electricity than I'm consuming and sending the rest back to the grid, helping others on the grid. If everybody did this, we'd never have blackouts. Prices would be lower. It reduces demand during the day. It reduces transmission requirements, which, like in California, is a big deal because transmission sparks cause wildfires as well, and people don't like to see transmission lines. So, and then if there is a blackout on the grid, then the batteries will kick in and provide my own electricity. So there's really little downside. And just to give you an idea of how cost effective it is, grid solar is really cheap, maybe 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour. And rooftop solar in your own home is more expensive, maybe 10 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, that sounds like a lot. But the grid operator in California is charging people now for their utility solar, because during the day, utility solar that costs them only 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour, they're charging 60 to 65 cents a kilowatt hour for. So because of they're charging for all sorts of other things, transmission and just overhead. So if you have your own rooftop solar, instead of paying 60 to 65 cents a kilowatt hour, you're only paying 10 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour for 25 years or so. You're saving a huge amount of money. So don't let anybody fool you otherwise by claiming that rooftop solar is expensive. You have to compare the cost of that solar with what you'd be paying from the grid otherwise. And that varies, of course, by country and location. But in a lot of places, it's getting more and more expensive for grid electricity, even though they're only paying 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour for their solar electricity.
I can see how that energy savings would sound very appealing for many Europeans over here who are very concerned about energy costs, especially with changing energy supplies from the war in Ukraine. I wanted to also ask what you say to people who say that this vision might be too optimistic, that there are simply political realities that block even small changes to emissions.
Well, people who say that this is too optimistic, I mean, they have to look at what's the alternative. There is no alternative. Transitioning everything to electricity as much as possible, and then providing that electricity with wind, water, solar. It's really the only solution to global warming, air pollution, and energy security simultaneously. There is no other solution. So you can either accept that we're going to have a warming planet and millions of people will die each year from air pollution continuing going on, or we can try to solve the problem. So if you're interested in solving the problem, this is the solution. But it's so beneficial. I mean, it saves money. It'll save, in terms of the cost savings worldwide, right now energy costs about $11 trillion per year. In 2050, that'll be about $18 trillion per year. Going to wind, water, solar, and electrifying everything, that reduces the annual energy cost to about $7 trillion per year. Because of the efficiency of electricity, you get 56% reduction of the requirements for energy and another 15% reduction in the cost per unit. So you save $11 trillion per year. What's the capital cost? Well, it's about $62 trillion up front. So 62 trillion divided by $11 trillion per year savings, that's a 5 to 6 year payback time for this whole system. On top of that, you create jobs. You create about 28 million more long-term full-time jobs than lost by transitioning. And you eliminate 7.5 million air pollution deaths per year. You eliminate the emissions associated with global warming, and you provide energy security. So what's not to like about such a transition? Creates jobs, saves huge amounts of money, and it eliminates health problems associated with energy, and it reduces climate problems substantially. On top of that, the land use is not substantial, as people claim it's going to take huge amounts of land. But in the United States, 1.3% of all land is taken up by the fossil fuel industry. A conversion to wind, water, solar would take less than 1% of U.S. land area. So there's so many benefits, little cost, little downside, that this is definitely the path forward.
And I'd just like to close out our conversation by asking, what are 3 resources that help you think and inform how you think about climate change? That can be accounts or people you follow, books to read, or things to get inspired by. Anything you'd like to share?
Well, I'm always looking for new information. So, I mean, I'm just scouring the internet every day to find new information on progress that's been made. So what's been inspiring lately is the California Independent System Operator daily, or actually every 5 minutes, they produce output of the electric grid of wind, solar, geothermal, hydro relative to demand. I look at the International Energy Agency, has lots of data internationally about the progress being made globally in terms of how countries that are going to different levels of wind, solar, geothermal, and hydropower. Some inspiring writers. Bill McKibben is very inspiring in terms of seeing the big picture and being able to really clarify to the public what's going on. There are many other scientists that are in our field that I admire who are doing really great work. Christian Breyer in Finland, Brian Mathiasen and in Denmark are a couple examples, but there are many more. Like Peter Strachan in the UK is really inspiring as well. I look broadly for lots of updating my own knowledge, and things are changing so fast that you can't just rely on something from either 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, so that's kind of who I look to.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was a fascinating conversation. And thank you again.
All right. Well, thanks, Carol. Appreciate it.